Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Margaret Anderson. I run a center of the Meulien Institute called Faster Cures. We're located in Washington, D.C., but what you'll hear on the panel discussion today is that the themes that we work on at Faster Cures are highly relevant, obviously, to Europe, but globally. And so those themes are: how do we incent and sort of make sure that we have enough innovation in the healthcare system and biomedical research system? And what is the pulse check? What's the state of innovation today? We're going to look at it through a lens of collaboration. And in other sectors, maybe there's collaboration. Maybe you've already been collaborating for years. I would say in biomedical research, that has not always been the case because there's been a number of incentives that were created in the system that perhaps precluded collaboration. But what we are seeing today in that biomedical research ecosystem is a real revolution in the ability for all of the sectors to work together. So I'm delighted to have a panel that represents different areas of that biomedical research ecosystem. And we will spend some time talking about it. We'll be able to engage with all of you in terms of panel questions. So today I'm going to start by asking each panelist to give a little bit of the perspective that they bring to this issue, kind of what brought them into healthcare and biomedical research. And I'm going to start all the way to my left. Annalisa Jenkins, who's CEO of a company called Dimension Therapeutics, and she's had a long track record of working in various parts of the ecosystem. Annalisa, can you tell us, what brought you to the work that you're doing and what excites you about the spirit of collaboration that we're seeing today?
Thanks, Margaret, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, so I've had a particularly unusual journey, which started not far away from here at St Bartholomew's Hospital, trained in London, cardiologist by training. Served for 9 years in the British Navy as a medical officer. Great way to pay your way through medical school, and then you have a return of service. And then I ended up actually in the academic world at the National Heart and Lung Institute, where I was a research fellow, and quickly discovered that my passion for global health, R&D, etc., was going to be a long, arduous journey in those days, seeking grants from what was then the Medical Research Council. So I flipped over into the industry, joined the industry in the mid-90s with Bristol Myers Squibb, was working on cholesterol reduction, cardiovascular disease. And really in the last 20 years, have spent most of my time in global clinical research, scientific medical affairs, lived and worked globally, was chief medical officer at Bristol, and then moved to German Merck Serono, and ran global R&D there. And so a couple of years ago, having been really traveling the world in mid to late stage drug development, I decided that it was time for a change and looked around to areas that I felt that were ripe for innovation, that were at the cusp of something that was really leading edge in science and medicine. And I came up with a few topics, one of which was cell and gene therapy. Felt that after many, many years in academia, that was ripe for investment and new therapeutics. So started a gene therapy company. So today, I'm the CEO of a public company, because as you know, these things tend to go very fast when you're not in big pharma. And so we are leveraging adeno-associated viruses with the desire to try and offer cures for people living with rare disorders of the liver, haemophilia, rare metabolic disorders. And Margaret just asked me to say, what keeps me so excited about what I do. I've been in this business for many, many years. I think we sit at a moment in time in the biopharmaceutical, biomedical research sector. It's the coming together of deeper insights into the basic biology of disease, the genome, really basic understanding of molecular pathways. This is combined with the new technologies we have at our disposal. Using viral vectors to deliver human genes to the hepatocyte, many of us could never have dreamed of that coming to fruition 10, 15 years ago. And combined with a lot of risk equity, certainly in the US, plenty of money flowing in to the sector. And we're going to talk about the ability to globally collaborate like we haven't ever been able to do before. So For me, in my career, in the last 30 years, I'm just as excited to get out of bed every day to work on these new technologies. And I'll speak a little bit later about some of the other boards I sit on and some of the other areas that I'm very excited about and their relevance to Europe specifically.
Thank you. Isabel, I'm going to ask you next. Isabel Meulien, who's head of patients and healthcare professionals at the European Medicines Agency, which is a critically important component to be able to push innovation through the system and actually have it deployed. So you trained as a physician and you started your career as a medical doctor. Tell us about what inspired you to do the work that you're doing today, and what are you excited about in terms of that work?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Yes, I started as a physician, as an endocrinologist, and by chance, I ended up in the regulatory world, in the French agency, as you can notice by my accent. And in fact, at that time, because that was quite a long time ago, some 25 years ago, everything was extremely secret. I mean, we didn't talk to industry, we didn't talk to patients, we were not transparent. It was really secrecy at all levels. And it felt actually extremely difficult to work because you didn't know where to turn when you had a question. Of course, you had access to experts, but it's a very limited view, the views of experts. And then I left, I went for a very short time in industry, and then I did some consultancy, which was very exciting. And when I started in the European Medicine Agency, my first role was to build up what we call scientific advice, which is to support the development of medicine by industry. So I had to build up this process and all this interaction, and it was quite fascinating to be able to speak to industry. And since the beginning, the agency looked at talking to all their stakeholders. And by stakeholder, we mean not only industry, but patients, of course, healthcare professional, and academia. So along these years, I've tried to develop this interaction, and actually we are now totally collaborating with patients and healthcare professionals. They are routinely involved in scientific advice, support to development to industry. They are involved in the evaluation. They are involved in the review of all the information we provide to patients. The same for healthcare professional. We looked at clinical practice. How can we bring on board clinical practice into the development, into the evaluation, to make sure that what we put on the market is actually used as it should be used. And now we are developing this interaction with academia, because we realized recently we did a survey on all the new medicine which are put on the market, and we realized that 17% of them are actually originated from academia. And there is this concept of red tape, of regulatory burden, and we thought it was time, and I think there is a political willingness as well at European level to support academia to translate innovation into medicines which can meet the regulatory standards. So that's what we are concentrating at the moment.
Fantastic.
And it's very exciting.
Well, it's intriguing what you were saying about starting your work and feeling like you were working in secrecy.
Yes. At that time, it was the case.
Right.
Yeah. I was on the other side of that. I was just smiling because when I joined the industry, it was in the UK, and I remember I was working on a Vanlev, which was a very important new medicine that never made it to the market for safety reasons, actually. But I remember going into meetings saying, well, I think we should go and talk to the regulators. And the senior management saying, no, we don't talk to regulators. And I said, why do we not talk to regulators? Well, we might not like what they're going to say. And I said, well, surely it would be really good to have a good understanding of the regulatory standards.
Yep.
It was absolutely the culture in Europe. A little bit in the US as well, I have to say, that really until Thomas, the previous head of the agency, came on board, that it was almost like, here's the agency, the regulator, that somehow you have to go and interact with at some stage. But let's try and stay clear of them as long as we can. And it wasn't really until a new generation of leaders came in, both in the industry and I think in the agency actually, that it really gave us the opportunity to say, no, we should be collaborating together because we all have the same agenda here. So I just want to, I was smiling at your comments because I remember that time when I was originally in the industry, day and night compared with how I think we operate today.
Right.
Yeah. Very much.
So I'm going next to Aisling Burnand. She's chief exec at the Association of Medical Research Charities. Aisling, you work a lot with organizations that are very closely, sort of working in the patient community. And tell us a little bit about that work for you. How you, what was the process for you to start to do this? And then what are you excited about?
Okay, brief introduction. My first proper job was working for an organisation that was called Rome Poulenc, and I worked in the UK and then went to France, where I looked after their international media relations. So I come at this from a communications and a media standpoint. And I came back to the UK and I ended up running the Bioindustry Association. So got really excited about what the emerging biotechnology companies were doing here in the UK. And then for me, there was something around the patient and what was interesting about, we'd seen a little bit about the rise of patient power, perhaps around HIV. And I was drawn to the charity side, and I joined Cancer Research UK's board, where I looked after, again, policy public affairs. And then now I am looking after an umbrella organisation, a membership organisation. And what really brought me back into this organisation is that patients really matter. And the interesting thing is it's patients that unite all of us. But it's so interesting just how often we've not really engaged them, and we've begun to engage them. So previously we hadn't really engaged them, and we've begun to engage them much, much more. And I think that's as much as perhaps in the charity space. I mean, charities are absolutely and know their community and the community they serve. But some of them have been going back and finding out some really interesting things that's been reshaping their research strategies. So a good example of an organization like that might be arthritis research. So they went out to their community, patient community, and said, well, what do you want? And what came back was quite surprising in some sense. It was we do want eventually some sort of cure, but in the meantime, could you really help us with kind of pain? Could you help us with the fatigue that we feel, whilst we're living with this condition? And because of that, they then reshaped their research strategy and then had to go back and have some really challenging conversations with the academic community who've been used to kind of this organization funding in one way, and who are now saying to them, look, we want to fund research in this sort of area. So I think we hear a lot at the moment about putting the patient first, patients at the heart. I think we're still in the foothills of that. But what excites me is I think we're seeing on both sides of the Atlantic and across Europe ways in which this is becoming much more important. And I think, kind of hopefully we're going to get into that a little bit. But that's what excites me.
Absolutely. So it's interesting. There was a panel the last hour, in this room talking about consumer behavior, and that the CEO of Sainsbury's was up here, someone from Avon, and I wrote down a quote where they all were basically in violent agreement saying, we have to listen to the consumer, and the consumer, and the computer. And the consumer is the patient in this case, or will be the patient. So I do think that we're in the beginning of a revolution where the whole system is reframing and reorienting to try to understand that what are the consumer needs, what are the patient needs. However, one of the things that we look at Faster Cures is the science around patient input, and it's nascent. And so that is something that I think as a collective, this community that you're seeing embodied on this panel is really going to need to assemble to try to understand, because we are at a certain moment in time, not just politically, and we'll get to the impact of public policy, Brexit, even in the United States, the election that we just had, on these systems. But if we can't come to some sort of agreement about what that science of patient input is, it becomes difficult for a company developing a product to actually adhere to it, patient organizations to assemble around it, academia, the regulators, et cetera. So Pierre Meulien, I want to have you speak next. You're the Executive Director of Innovative Medicines Initiative, which really has pioneered this public-private partnership work in biomedical. Tell us about what you're excited for.
Well, I think everybody's already chatted about how we all need to work much closer together. I call it end-to-end integration from the best research in our academic institutions to those who are going to regulate, use, pay for, and of course the patients who are the ultimate consumer of innovation. So I think this is a very exciting time. The Innovative Medicines Initiative is a kind of platform vehicle through which all of this can be brought together. It is a long-term commitment from the public and private. So public, the European Commission; private, the pharmaceutical companies through the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and their associations. And they have put a long-term commitment. This is €5 billion over 20-odd years. And it really allows us to experiment, if you like. Well, it's a large experiment, but experiment with bringing people together and encouraging collaboration at all levels. Now, from what people have already said, you can tell that the ecosystem is changing, and it's a very dynamic ecosystem. And it's changing at all levels. So the academics are changing, pharmaceutical companies are changing, the regulators are changing, the patient voice is becoming more important. All of these things need to be discussed on one platform, and IMI creates and provides that platform. Just one example of changes in the industry, for example, the pharmaceutical industry, 10 years ago, their most secret, we heard the word secret before, their most proprietary asset would be their compound libraries. Today, we have a very large project, about €180 million, called the European Lead Factory, where 7 pharmaceutical companies have decided to pool those very secret assets, added to by academic compound libraries, and we have this enormous asset now that is available to SMEs, to companies, to academics to screen their targets. Unbelievable even 5 or 10 years ago. So this is the new paradigm. And this is why I'm so excited, because I'm a molecular biologist by training, but have 20 years experience in the private sector. But when I was in the private sector, I was frustrated because the interface between public and private, between the industry and academia, there was too much tension and not enough trust for it to be as productive as it could be and as it can be. And I think models like IMI allow this to happen at a scale which is quite significant.
So what's at the root of the too much tension, not enough trust? I could hear and the head nodding and see the head nodding. So what's at the root of that? Why wasn't there trust?
Because traditionally everybody was kept, it was a silo thing. Pharmaceutical companies never collaborated with each other. And now they do. Part of it is because they have to.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I was going to say that.
Part of it is because they have to, because there are targets out there. There are, Alzheimer's disease is a perfect example, but there are many, many others that others can talk about, where the industry has failed totally. But they did that in parallel on the same target, using the same clinical trial design, using the same everything, and they all failed together. €3 billion later, they scratch their heads saying, okay, we need to work differently. Okay, so it's a learning experience.
It was an evolution of leadership. I mean, it's been a very interesting 10 years. I mean, I think in the last 10 years you've seen a couple of things. It's amazing how austerity and failure focuses the mind and is a great platform for innovation and different ways of thinking. It's the first thing. Secondly, there was a whole new generation of leaders that came into the organizations that we're talking about. And I was lucky enough to be part of that sort of generational shift of R&D leaders. And the combination of our big pharmaceutical companies spending billions only to see one after another fail, and therefore, big question marks over the value of R&D investment and the value of holding medical research and scientific innovation in-house, combined with a series of leaders who came to the table wanting to look out, wanting to look to collaboration. I think the combination of those two has resulted in what's trendily known as the externalization of innovation from big pharma. And what does that mean? It means actually in the last 10 years what you've seen is the real sort of shrinking down of bricks and mortar and internal capacity within a lot of the large pharma companies, and the willingness to go out and look into academia, into the biotech world, around the world for these little gems, and also the willingness of senior leaders to get together in a pre-competitive way to say, how can we accelerate? How can we enable cures?
Right.
And that's why the work that Faster Cures has been so important, because I said earlier, I think one of the things that you've done remarkably for the US is to really enable and accelerate what was already a trend that was going on in the US, and I think we're now increasingly very much seeing in Europe. And we were saying earlier that perhaps in certain countries in Europe, I think it's advanced faster than in others.
I think Alzheimer is an extremely good example, because what we have seen as well is that the way the drugs are developed is changing as well, because now, rather than to look at scientific outcomes, we look at patient or carers' outcome, which is much more interesting, not only for regulators, for patient and healthcare professional, but also for all the HTA and the payers, because they know what they are paying for. Whereas with scientific outcomes, they are not so sure what they are paying for.
Right.
And this is also something that I would like to mention, is that now, when we do this scientific advice, this help to the development of medicine, we bring on board what we call the HTA bodies, the health technology assessment bodies, because we want to shorten the time to access to medicine. And instead of looking at it in sequence, first the approval by regulatory authorities, then going through the health technology assessment, then going to the reimbursement aspect, we want to shorten everything and look initially, when the drug is being developed, what could be the way to develop it that suits the regulatory requirements, but also the health technology requirements as well, in order to shorten all this time to get better earlier access for the patients.
So what you're hearing in the panel is we definitely, I think there's consensus in the sector, across the sectors, that we want to shorten the time. We want, sort of efficiency built in. Some of it is by necessity. Some of it is we don't have endless resources. We need to pool the scientific ideas. But Aisling, I want to bring up Brexit. So along comes Brexit, and sort of drops in the middle of this for at least the UK. Tell us about what is happening and what your organization has had to do vis-a-vis these medical research charities, and then we'll come back to some of these collaboration themes.
Okay, so I mean, the world is changing, and I guess the punchline to perhaps what we've just been talking about is that no one organization can do all of this on their own. I think you use a great statistic, there are 10,000 diseases and 500 treatments. There is a lot of work that we need to do. And I think that's just been really interesting in thinking about how we need to think about collaborating. I can come back to a couple of examples on that. So there's a lot of work to do, and I think the science is really interesting. And we engaged with some senior leaders recently, and they were talking about a sort of tsunami of new treatments or new ideas, and the science is really going to change, I think, the dynamic for us. So I'm excited about what the future holds, but of course then comes along Brexit. And I think there are challenges. I mean, the life science sector here in the UK, overwhelmingly the research community was for Remain. Because, I think from the basis that, curing cancer, heart disease, research knows no boundaries. We have to all work together, and it's really, really collaborative in terms of how it approaches things. So the research community, life science community, really wanted to remain. Okay, we are where we are today, and so I think what we have been attempting to try and do is look at, as best as we can, to try and understand the marketplace, to advise governments, our government on what it is that we believe needs to happen in the next couple of years, in order that we can hopefully continue to thrive as a nation that has a long, has had a great history in medical research, and actually where the fundamentals are great. We've got some great universities, we have great science institutes, etc. So that's one bit of work. And the other piece of work is sort of the broader bit. Where do we want to be in 5 years' time, and how do we get, not 5 years' time, I'd say 10 years' time, and how do we get there? And some of this comes off the back of, a new government coming in and thinking about, okay, what do we do now? And there has been articulation, certainly in terms of communicating about an additional £2 billion of money that's going to go into research and innovation. That is helpful. And then there's also clarification about there will be an industry strategy. Who knows what that will mean for the life sciences sector, but certainly the ecosystem in the life science sector, from the basic research community right through to the commercial side, looking at both the treatment sides, diagnostics, devices, med tech, etc., are really, really beginning to work together to come up with a plan. What needs to happen? And I think we've been looking at things like, what might be the kind of ways that fiscally we can incentivize kind of perhaps greater collaboration? Are there some ideas in that particular area? How do we build on what we've got in order to hopefully have a good future? But I don't deny that it's challenging, and it's especially challenging sometimes when you're in a room and you're having to think, well, who am I talking to now, and what do they want to hear, versus actually perhaps what we need to communicate and influence in the broader sense for the future good of medical research, both here in the UK and internationally.
Annalise, I know you wanted to opine on this for a minute.
Yeah. I think about Brexit in some ways as it relates to capital and three forms of capital. I think there's the human capital, there's obviously financial capital, and there's knowledge. And obviously one of the key points that needs to be kept front and center is ensuring we have a vibrant academic workforce. I sit on the scientific panel for health, actually, which advises the European Medicines Agency on the umbrella strategies that they should be thinking about for the next 10 to 15 years. I'm also on the science board of the US FDA, where we think about, the broad-based sort of scientific policies we want to pursue. And of course, it comes as no surprise that the common theme is always people. How do we build the workforce of the future, the next generation that's going to sustain and unlock the potential of all this amazing science that we have in our hands? So when it comes to Brexit, at every table I'm at, I am constantly urging people to put human capital and the movement of this human capital that will continue to sustain and build upon the brilliant foundational platform we have in this country and take it further forward. The financial capital is obvious. We get a lot of money that flows around from Europe. I also sit on the board of a little spin-out from Oxford. It's a perfect example of what we need to preserve as we move through the next few years. The Ludwig Institute, Oxford University, working together to discover new pathways for the treatments of cancer, funded just recently by a major grant from IMI. Mm-hmm. What a perfect example of what we need to preserve moving forward. So I was thrilled that the government recognised the urgent need to step in with financial capital. And then, of course, knowledge. Innovation comes from the freedom for people to discover, talk, share knowledge and insights. That's the way we innovate and discover new things. And, the internet of everything will continue to allow us to do that. But what we want to make sure is that Brexit doesn't become some sort of cultural block in the minds of people. So for me, again, trying to ensure that Brexit doesn't become the excuse to close down, that Brexit really becomes, a mechanical way to evolve to a different political, economic, and financial system, but doesn't cause us to do what we do brilliantly, which is increasingly to share ideas through the internet of everything.
So, Isabel and Pierre, I won't ask you directly to comment on Brexit, but can you comment on it from the standpoint of the systems that you represent in the biomedical research ecosystem, and how do you keep those moving forward as all of the different countries are going through their various changes? Because certainly in terms of IMI and what you represent, you have companies and partners that span the globe.
Of course, of course. So, I mean, we are living in a very volatile world. So the key for us is to keep the ship steady and no matter what happens, continue the collaborations. So that's our goal. And when we're asked about Brexit, we always say, for the moment, business as usual. We encourage all of our UK partners to keep applying to our programs. The UK is the major beneficiary. The UK universities are the major beneficiary of what we do. So collaboration is key, and obviously the UK is going to have to maintain some manner of collaboration worldwide. So for us, it's business as usual, and I've got great faith in those who are making the decisions that this collaborative nature will continue.
Comments?
I could repeat exactly what Pierre has just said. I mean, of course, we cannot speculate on what's going to happen. It will depend on the relationship between the UK and Europe. But let's hope for the best, because indeed we have done a lot of things with our UK expert, with the companies, and so I mean, we need to continue this collaboration in one way or another. So let's hope for the best.
Well, I'm not sure if I mean, probably you do realise that Isabel works for an organisation that really in the last 15, 20 years has revolutionised the way that therapeutics across the spectrum are regulated and find their way into the market, but also remain on the market and are assured to be safe for patients, and that's the European Medicines Agency. And when I joined the industry, when we first were in the industry, everything was decentralized.
Right.
Today we have a very well-run, leading global regulatory institution called the European Medicines Agency, based just down the road here. So clearly there are some very practical implications that have to be addressed. I think over 800 employees in London, all working for the benefit of the regulation of medicines and therapeutics in Europe. So, as was said, this is not going to be without its challenges, but I just hope that, as I would echo, that people keep really what we all care about fundamentally at the centre, which is the ability for patients across Europe, because Europe's not going away with Brexit, to be able to gain access to important new cures and to therapeutics that might extend and enhance their lives as well. So I think that's got to be kept very much at the centre.
As you said, I mean, patient safety is absolutely paramount. It's almost sometimes can be counterintuitive to other sectors to think that regulation is a good thing, but I think we've seen in the area of human health that it is a really good thing, and that the system that we've got has evolved over many years and actually works very, very well. And I think that's important. I think the other piece that's important about, kind of the collaboration and movement from a patient perspective is that, there are, in rare diseases, in clinical trials in rare diseases, you need the patient to travel, across Europe to perhaps take part in a clinical trial or to be aware. And we've made huge strides in the area of rare diseases in terms of with the EMEA and looking at the orphan drug legislation, all of those things to try and really make Europe a great place for research in the rare disease area. And we've made some huge strides in that area. And it would be absolutely devastating if that were to undo in any way, shape or form. So we must be able to keep that and to ensure that we can continue very much to collaborate, because it matters really to patients.
Let's talk for a minute about the system and how it relates to the healthcare system. So the whole promise of biomedical research and the work that we're talking about is to innovate products and interventions and therapies that solve problems, right? So you brought up the 10,000 diseases, 500 treatments equation. So clearly there's a big delta, there's a big gap. Now, we have a healthcare system that is responsible for deploying all of this. How are we seeing these two systems connect, or what do we need to be thinking about? I don't know if in the IMI you've got systems or partnerships that are looking at that. How are we accessing the data? What do we need to be doing going forward? I mean, we've certainly talked about making patients at the center of research, but we of course want to have patients at the center of healthcare as well. So who wants to start on that?
Can I start with maybe
Yeah.
it's slightly broader, but it is around, I think, kind of, this is a conference I know that has a lot of sort of finance people here, and I think that I think the area of venture philanthropy is a really interesting area, and perhaps where the UK is slightly behind the curve in terms of what we're seeing in the States, but where we have seen some really important initiatives. I think, we were talking about dementia and just the huge problem that we have got in trying to find new treatments to bring through to patients. I think the fact that we have seen a big push globally on dementia, and then we saw about 2 years ago the development of something called the Dementia Discovery Fund, which has about £2 million from Alzheimer's Research UK. So not a large sum of money, but that leveraged in government money. It then leveraged in pharmaceutical money, and I think today it's at least a $100 million fund plus that has already, at the beginning of the year, made some investments into a couple of organizations. But what's interesting is it's sort of around what I would call passion capital. They have highlighted that it's about getting more things advanced as opposed to making money and returning it to investors. So it's
and wouldn't
very
it also
different
have been
area.
in response to the tremendous burden of Alzheimer's on the healthcare system
Absolutely.
and on patients?
Absolutely. So I think that's an example of kind of like beginning to think about how could we do new things, and how do we bring different groups of people together, to perhaps, medical research is expensive. We know it's expensive. It takes quite a long time to get something through to a patient. But we need to be kind of, I guess, bringing different groups together to think about how do we do this better, perhaps how do we get a little bit more capital into certain areas. And I think the role that charities can play, it's not just about the money. It's often going to be relatively small bits of money, but what they can provide is scientific excellence, or they can provide a real connection to the patient community, the clear identification of need, which can help investors. That can help investors kind of think about how they perhaps fund things in a smarter way. So that's just one area of a system that it's kind of like a different tribe. I feel it's a very different tribe. It's an area I don't really know, but I'm kind of beginning to understand it. But we need to bring the world of the sort of the financial world closer with, I think, some of the medical world, certainly here in the United Kingdom.
There's been a big shift actually in the UK. We're in the UK, London, can't help but talk about NHS England. I live in America actually, and I've been there for 16 years. And there's a very interesting view of socialized systems of healthcare that exist in Europe. And I often find myself to be the lone voice in the crowd as I advocate for the huge opportunities that an organization like the NHS and similar systems exist in other countries in Europe offers for the conduct of medical research. And actually in the last 10 years, I've noticed a very significant shift through government policy to open up the NHS as a really tremendous place to come and talk to patients, to access patients, and to access leading institutions. And this was a coordinated effort, not only by the regulators, but also by the senior leaders and the academics within the NHS. And so I'll tell you, the view from the other side of the pond is that the UK actually has become a very attractive place for us to come and access collaborations and partnerships. And science. And, you asked about the role of the healthcare system. I think the healthcare system has to be fundamentally at the center, because as you're developing the drugs, you may be in that system as you generate the data, but ultimately the medicines that you are pushing forward have to be accepted, because there's no point developing a medicine when patients have no ability to access it. Because there's nothing more depressing as an R&D leader in the world to spend years developing a new medicine for cancer only to see that the patients who are so in need have no ability to access it at the end of the day. So I think somebody mentioned end-to-end integration earlier. That's what this really looks like. And in the UK, we do have a unique opportunity because we have this wonderful thing called NHS England. Needs a bit more funding. I accept that, but that's government policy. But there's a huge opportunity.
I'd be interested to have a discussion with you on the ability or inabilities for health systems to change at the pace that would be required in order for that innovation. Because I've always had the feeling that health systems are so, and for good reason, they're under huge financial strain. It's very difficult for the so-called technology pushers. I would, all of us are sort of in some way, a lot of our partners in IMI are, I would say, technology pushers. But we're not that good at articulating value to those who are actually going to pay for things.
Well, I think that's a wonderful point, but let's get back to Margaret's favourite topic. I mean, that's the patient. I mean, at the end of I'm a free marketeer, I believe in demand-supply economics. At the end of the day, if there are patient communities who are desperately in need for cures and better options, and if they can get themselves together and help us bring forward those medicines efficiently with collaboration with the organizations, the charities, then I may be a bit Pollyanna-ish about this, but at the end of the day, I do believe that enables our path appropriately through the regulatory process, and it also enables our path to getting access to for patients to these medicines. And again, this is where we come back to the voice of the patient.
Right, but I think we've seen it in some of the worlds of disease research where there were no therapies. We've seen breathtaking progress. We've seen Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, multiple myeloma, leukemia, lymphoma. I mean, a number of the patient groups that cover diseases. But I also think that what we're starting to chip away at when you talked about technology pushers is how do we actually reform a health care system so that it can be at a place that's ready to accept this innovation, which may or may not cost a lot of money, but it actually may give life. So I don't know what part of that you were going to tackle.
I think we have great opportunities in front of us to involve the healthcare systems, and this is in what we are calling the real-world data, big data overall, and because they have the data we need to ensure the safety of the product, to make sure that we tackle any safety issue, to ensure the good clinical use of the product, which when we put a product on the market, we don't know how it will be used, and it may create some problems, or it may create even opportunities to further develop the product. And this is a whole world of data that we don't really have access to. And this is a fantastic opportunity to develop collaboration with the healthcare systems because they have all this data.
Right.
Through e-health record, all these database, registries, and so on. And that's where we can develop some cooperation and where we can identify mutual value and mutual benefit between the different partners.
So is that happening quickly enough? I mean, is the system actually listening? None of us want to sort of live our whole life and feel like we could have made a difference if we just push the system that much faster. Are the healthcare systems prepared to do this?
I think it's slow, and I think it's challenging. Certainly in the UK, we've just come out of austerity. There is not enough money in the system, but I think there are signs of where things are beginning to work. The one example I'd hold up around real-world evidence was the study that GSK placed, working with the National Institute for Health Research in Salford, up in the Manchester area, around asthma and COPD, and that was absolutely a real-world evidence clinical trial. first that had ever been done in this particular way. And there was so much learning for everybody that was involved. I mean, they literally were able to connect the GP practice to the pharmacist, to the hospital, to other kind of players, so that they were able to begin to spot challenges and trends, people who weren't picking up their prescription, somebody who then was, perhaps emergency into hospital, things that they had never been able to spot before, they were able to begin to see. And I think this power of data, if we can make it work, and I think we need more of those examples to show how it works, to enthuse, and also possibly to show where there might be some savings in terms of doing this, how it actually leads to better outcomes. If you can stop people going into hospital and having to spend the night because you can keep them at home because, the GP can check on them, that really does begin to change the dynamic, notwithstanding that the GPs have an awful lot of things to do. But I think those are the examples. We've also got other things that are being tried within the NHS, Vanguard projects, and then there's also some other things with, kind of some of the academic health science networks, which bring kind of certainly here kind of the academic base through with the NHS and with others. I think, at the moment it's pilot. It's pilot and trying to get that rolled out. That's the biggest challenge. But I think the prize in data is about really delivering better care now and hopefully kind of better research and treatment eventually if we can get the data joined up. 60 million UK records joined up is significant. It would be significant in terms of what it could do for, say, the United Kingdom. No doubt other countries are trying to do their own thing, we know, in data. It's whether we can do that and how we bring people in the room here, to understand why data matters.
Right, and why should they be participating and allowing that data to be used. So Pierre, you talked about, I'm enamored with the concept you brought up of technology pushers. Are there things happening in other sectors and industries vis-a-vis technology that we need to be bringing into healthcare and biomedical more quickly? Is it happening at a pace that you feel is enough?
Well, obviously, the Innovative Medicines Initiative started with just a very simple, very binary initiative between, academic science and pharmaceutical industry. It was obvious in our second phase that that's not enough. That we need absolutely to bring in the imaging companies, the ICT companies, the diagnostic companies, the medtech companies into the playground in order for us to go as quickly as we can. So the acceleration piece is really, really important to us because we have to get better at that. And is it going fast enough? Probably not, but I think we're building the framework so that it can go faster. And once again, it's about partnership and collaboration and alignment of goals. If people get aligned around specific goals, then things can be done.
And that's where patients and charities can really help.
Absolutely.
Because the great thing is, a number of my members are involved with, the IMI, and either they might be leading or they're participating, and the patients can really help hold that why are we all here, kind of during that discussion.
It sounded like you had agreement with that too.
Well, I always put my hand up and say that I've been in the industry for 30-something years, and I'm a complete technology dinosaur, so I'm the worst person to be leading this. And I also say that the pharmaceutical industry is collectively a technological dinosaur. You might be surprised by that. I mean, what we do at the heart is innovate, and we do amazing science, but actually, we were really rather left behind by what was going on in the west coast of California in the valley. And we've been rather slow, I think, in embracing, new technology. I actually, for a quick case study, so I was asked to join the board of a little new company, Newco, in California about 18 months ago, and I was sent the non-confidential deck, and it was called Mouse Sera at the time, and it was a new model for discovery in rodents, mouse studies. I'm like, why would they want me on the board of this? And they said, no, we're going to revolutionize the way that preclinical work in rodents is done to discover new medicines. I thought, oh, that's really interesting. So wind forward 18 months, I am actually on the board, and I love it because it was founded by a group of tech investors. They knew nothing about healthcare, but what they saw was there'd been no innovation in the last 30 years with the way that we do and conduct mouse experiments on therapeutics. The human in looking at cages every day, touching the animals, etc. So they've created a fully digital vivarium. The mouse sits in a digital world now, goes up to the cloud, and not only are we getting unique new insights into the effect of medicines on these rodents, the byproduct of this is that it's actually a much better environment for the mice to sit in. So of course we care about, the environment that our mice sit in because they're not handled so much. So the combination of bringing tech investors into a world of drug discovery has resulted in a phenomenal sort of disruptive potential change in the way that we think about bringing new medicines for humans to the clinic. So I think that's a really good example of what happens when you bring people together. And I love it because I sit in these meetings all the time with these techies, who think about the world in such a different way. And if we can bring more of that, I think, into what we do every day, we'll see tremendous opportunities being unlocked.
Well, and I think there's a great appetite in certainly the patient community to be wide open to the possibilities of what other sectors are doing. I mean, I would say even in the patient advocacy community that we interact with extensively, groups and organizations are asking themselves, are we innovative enough? Have we been, are we stale? What do we need to do to make sure that we're talking to as broad a network as possible? I mean, another theme that we're hearing in that sector is, I was at a meeting where I was kind of surprised. Somebody said, I want to talk to patients in the wild versus patients in the zoo. And I thought, well, that seems kind of derogatory about patients. And what they meant is, the patients that are really already embedded into organizations and they're in the know and they're using all of the apps, are they already the converted? And how do we actually get farther out so that we're covering the landscape? So I think that's something going forward that everybody's going to have to be thinking about.
And I think technology will help us do that,
Absolutely.
I think, in terms of making those connections. And we're seeing some
Absolutely.
good citizen science projects which are really capturing the imagination of patients and citizens in terms of how they can help research,
Right.
which will be good.
And what we've seen with these groups is that they will innovate and have innovated the research system. That my point back to the healthcare system is, there still is, I think, and I want to hear if you agree, the sense that the doctor knows best. I don't, I didn't go to medical school. What am I going to know about that? I mean, do you think that we can get to an era where patients can engage in a different way, and is it going to be technology that creates that?
Well, I think it's happening already. I always used to say the physician was the learned intermediary. That was the way civil society and medicine grew up. We're part of that. Social media, technology, completely changed it. I remember when, and regulation needs to move forward as well, and I think is moving forward. So for a period of time, the pharmaceutical industry actually was not allowed to talk to patients.
Right.
We have to remember, it wasn't that long ago that our ability to use social media or any technology to reach out to patients was highly regulated, and I would say highly restrictive. Now, I was at a meeting with Rob Califf, the head of the US FDA, a couple of weeks ago in Boston, and he said, if you're developing a drug for a rare disease or for any important disease, if you come to the agency without an advocacy group or without a group of patients, you by definition have put yourself at a disadvantage. Quote. My goodness. I mean, I think what a fundamental shift that represents on behalf of the agencies. Yeah, there's been a huge shift. But also on the ability of patients to have their voices heard. I think that's really what's shifting, is the remarkable ability for patients to get together to have their voices heard.
And it is about, we had a conference last week with the ABPI at the pharmaceutical industry. It was the first time that AMRC with the industry joined up, and then we brought in patients. And what was really interesting, there was one top line that said, if you're going to involve patients, don't put us on at the end of a program. Get us to speak first. literally have us with the opening remarks and the discussion and then involved throughout the day rather than an afterthought at the end because we're box ticking. And that, I think, is we are beginning to see that much, much more. I still think there are some barriers, kind of when we came up with some of them, or uncovered some of them when we were putting on our own event, that I think there's still an over compliance issue, sort of perhaps in large pharmaceutical companies, about can they be in the same room with a patient? I mean, I certainly think, why shouldn't they be in this pre-competitive space? They absolutely must be, because we want to hear what their viewpoints are in terms of what outcomes matter for them, as well as the clinicians. And then hopefully that allows us to really design studies that are going to be fit for purpose and hopefully will be more successful. So I think we're beginning to do that. I think there are barriers, those sort of external ones, and then maybe internal barriers. Our own mindsets, I think, are kind of interesting on some of this stuff about, perhaps we shouldn't be talking to them. I think we have to challenge those.
Yeah.
I get told quite a lot, you shouldn't be doing that. It's like, well, I think we should. I absolutely believe we should, and I think that is absolutely the future.
So let's have one more point, and then if anybody in the audience wants to ask a question, raise your hand. I think we have microphones.
Just a very quick one on this very point. I think the key here is the transparency
Yes.
with which we go through these interactions. Because yes, there might be criticisms from outside, the industry shouldn't be talking to X, Y, Z. But if it's done in a very transparent way, I think we can get over this hurdle.
That's right. Agreed. Question.
Yeah, I guess to your point around the importance of advocacy groups, and no doubt they are a big push both for the regulator on the one hand, but also for the industry. To certainly listen to the patients. I mean, we had one very recent example where actually the advocacy groups put too much pressure, and the FDA took the wrong decision, in my view, about Sarepta and the DMD program. So I guess I completely buy into what you're saying, but on the other hand, is this the future, that actually advocacy groups, in particular with rare diseases, and in particular in this case, obviously with a pediatric rare disease, are going to push the regulator to take decisions that they really shouldn't take?
Oh, that's a whole hours of discussion. For those of you that are not aware, it was a very contentious, long process by which a drug for Duchenne's muscular dystrophy was approved in the US just recently. So I'll just make a couple of comments on it. I work in rare diseases, so obviously we're very interested in this topic. My view is that there has to be the voice of a patient at the table. There have to be advocates, because advocates are the ones that are going to enable the agency to truly understand the benefits and the risks, and thus the overall profile of a therapeutic that they wish to have access to for their disease. That does not take away from the importance of an agency truly independently being able to assess both the benefits, the risks, the therapeutic index. And I think both can exist in harmony. And the FDA was very clear that the case for Sarepta, and we'll see what happens, subsequently in Europe, stands on its own. Certainly hasn't lowered the standards. There are a lot of lessons learned, but I believe that it shouldn't be used as an example that should remove the voice of the advocates. It should be used as a lesson learned and a teachable moment where we can all come together to progress forward, to enable this ecosystem to do what's best for society.
Isabel,
Just to follow up on this topic, we don't have Sarepta yet, so let's see what's going to happen. But I would like to say that in the European Medicine Agency, we bring patients on board much earlier in the debate, so they do understand what is the development of the thinking, the decision-making process within the agency. And so far, we never had this kind of extreme behavior, because we take them on board since the development of the product. So they continuously follow up. And it has been rather successful until now, and we will continue. And I think what we have to advise to all the patients who are involved in advocacy is to keep their critical thinking both vis-à-vis industry, but also vis-à-vis regulators. They really need to stand for themselves and think by themselves, trying not to be influenced by anybody.
Well, and I think it goes back to the transparency discussion, right, that
Yes.
you brought up. And I think this is an evolving conversation, not just of the role of patient advocates or the ultimate patient, but I think how quickly do we want to see the innovation come through and what are going to be the scientific and safety standards? So if you think about oncology products, or when we hopefully all get to see some really great breakthroughs in neuroscience for dementia and Alzheimer's and other things, in the oncology space, at least in the United States, if the FDA started to pull the garage door down on new products, we wouldn't see things like immunotherapy. Immunotherapy is far from done. There was a piece in the New York Times in the last couple of days about some of the side effects, and it was articulating how the science is going so quickly. There isn't even enough scientific literature yet on the effects of the treatment, and how can the clinical community, the healthcare community, actually be ready for that. So I feel like we're in this place, we were talking about just, the pace of innovation in our lives in general has created a dynamic where it's very hard to sit still for an hour. So we thank you all for being here with us in this discussion. It's hard to absorb all of the information. I think our scientific, regulatory, healthcare environments are no different. So we're kind of building the plane as we fly it, but I think that what you've heard in this panel is that there is an enormous amount of intensity, excitement, a unified feeling, if you will, about where people really want to see the system going. So I want to thank our panelists and thank this discussion. We're going to have a video of this. We hope that you guys will share it far and wide. But I think if we came back and had this discussion in 1 year's time, we would have seen some amazing progress. So I'm very optimistic, despite some of the political winds that that are sort of forcing change on all these systems, that this system is really strong and ready to go forward. And ultimately, everybody is doing it for patients. So thank you to our great panelists today. Thanks very much.
You.